Imagine a boat that vanished not once, not twice, but 3 times. A vessel that left port with 4 men aboard was found drifting days later, only to disappear again, this time forever. And when it was finally discovered months later, it carried only a corpse, a torn notebook, and a silence more terrifying than any storm. No crash, no wreck, just a ghost ship that kept coming back, with fewer answers each time. What happened aboard the Fausto is one of the strangest maritime mysteries in modern history, and the truth may have sunk with it. Have you ever heard of a ship that disappeared not once, not twice, but 3 times, each time returning with fewer answers and more questions than before? This isn't a legend pulled from ghost stories or sailors' lore. It's a real case that left experienced sailors, investigators, and even governments baffled. A fishing boat called the Fausto, which sailed from Spain's Canary Islands in 1968, vanished from the radar of reality in a way no one could explain. But unlike most lost-at-sea stories, Fausto kept coming back, first with survivors, then with a corpse, and finally with a silence that still hasn't spoken. This is the story of the ghost ship that seemed to have a mind of its own, a voyage that defied logic, and a mystery that time could never bury. Welcome back to HEMA Real Investigations, where today we delve into one of maritime history's most haunting and unexplained cases. On July 20th, 1968, the Fausto, a modest fishing boat owned by Rafael Acosta, was docked at La Palma, one of the main islands in Spain's Canary chain. The mission was simple: sail 60 miles to nearby El Hierro, specifically the town of Las Puntas in Frontera, to deliver agricultural goods. On board were 3 seasoned sailors, Raymond, Alberto, and their cousin, Miguel. They had made this trip countless times before and could likely navigate it with their eyes closed. But on that evening, just as the crew was prepping for the return trip, a desperate man ran toward the dock. Panting, waving, pleading, his name was Julio, and he was a mechanic who had just received terrible news from his wife. Their young daughter was gravely ill. Julio had missed the last official ferry back to La Palma and couldn't wait 2 more days for the next one. He begged for passage, and the sailors, moved by his urgency, welcomed him aboard without hesitation or charge. At 2:30 a.m. on July 21st, the Fausto, now carrying 4 souls, set out across calm waters under a thin veil of sea mist. It was expected to return to La Palma by 10 a.m. the same day. The sea was quiet, the weather fair, and these were waters the men knew intimately. But the boat never arrived. Rafael, the owner, wasn't immediately alarmed. Delays were common. Mechanical issues, minor course changes. These things happened. He had even planned to sail with them, but was delayed by business. But as hours turned into the afternoon, and families began to gather anxiously at the dock, Rafael decided to send a second vessel along Fausto's expected return path. That ship searched into the evening, no sign. As night fell, concern turned to dread. Radio alerts were sent. The Spanish government was notified. A full-scale rescue operation launched, including naval ships, fishing vessels, and search planes. But days passed. Nothing. No wreckage. No signal. No sightings. Just silence. It was as if the sea had swallowed the Fausto whole. 4 days after the Fausto vanished into calm waters, when most people had given up hope and the sea search had started to scale down, a signal came. Not from the Spanish Navy, not from a radar sweep, but from the unlikeliest source, a British cargo steamer named the Ducalcia. While sailing through the Atlantic late at night, its crew noticed flashing lights in the distance. Not distress flares, flashlights. The lights blinked steadily, almost rhythmically. It was Morse code. Someone was asking for help. The captain ordered the ship to turn toward the light, and as they approached, the silhouette of a small fishing boat came into view. It was Fausto, drifting aimlessly in the open ocean, 120 miles west of La Palma, miles off course, completely alone. On board were the 4 men, miraculously alive, starved, dehydrated, sunburned, but alive. The Ducalcia's crew was stunned, not only because the boat had been missing for days, but because it had drifted so far into waters it had no business reaching. The crew brought food and water and asked the obvious question: what happened? But the men aboard Fausto were tight-lipped. They said nothing serious had occurred. No mechanical failure, no navigational error worth noting. They just wanted fuel and some supplies. They insisted they could sail back themselves. The Ducalcia's captain found this odd, even suspicious. Julio's daughter was gravely ill, yet he refused a quicker, safer tow back. The 3 sailors looked nervous, hollow-eyed, like men who had seen something they weren't ready to explain. Despite all logic, the captain complied. Maybe it was pride, maybe confusion, maybe just the overwhelming sense that these 4 men wanted to be left alone. So the steamer gave them fuel, enough for 18 hours, and watched as the Fausto disappeared over the horizon once more. By all calculations, they should have returned to La Palma by 7 p.m. Families gathered at the dock again, champagne and food prepared for a joyful homecoming. But the Fausto never came back. Not that night, not the next day, not ever. Once again, the boat had vanished, only this time, no one knew why. And this time, everyone knew they had already been found once, and still chose to go missing. What had happened during those 4 days adrift? Why did they refuse a tow? Why did they act like nothing was wrong, while saying nothing at all? The second disappearance wasn't just baffling, it was chilling. The second disappearance of the Fausto sparked a wave of panic unlike anything seen in the Canary Islands' maritime history. The Spanish government escalated the situation into a national emergency. What had begun as a missing boat was now a full-scale maritime mystery. They launched the largest naval and air search in Spain's modern history. More planes, more ships, even military bombers joined the hunt. The search grid expanded far beyond the island chain. Fishermen volunteered their boats. Coastal towns kept vigil over the waters. For days, then weeks, the ocean was scoured. But the sea, ever indifferent, gave no answers. There was no debris, no signal, not even the glint of a hull under the sun. The Fausto had disappeared again, this time after having already been rescued. And with no new clues, the authorities were eventually forced to call off the search. They declared the 4 men dead. But the Atlantic hadn't finished with them yet. 2 months later, on October 9th, 1968, an Italian merchant ship called the Anna Timar was en route to Venezuela when its crew spotted something drifting on the water. At first, it looked like an abandoned boat. But as they drew closer, the markings on the hull became visible. It was the Fausto. Again. This time, no lights, no crew, no movement, just a derelict shell floating in defiance of every explanation. The captain ordered his men to board and investigate. What they found stunned them. The boat was eerily intact. No signs of violent damage, no storm impact. The cabin was quiet. But when they opened the hatch to the engine room, a wave of rotting air surged upward. Flashlights swept over the space, and there, lying on the floor, was the mummified body of a man, dehydrated, shirtless, curled with a radio in hand. His face was frozen in a final expression, his fingers stiff, as if still reaching for contact. The smell was overpowering. but one of the sailors pushed forward, searching for any sign of identity, and near the body he found a small notebook. They left the body untouched. It was too far gone, and the stench too thick. But the notebook, stained and weathered, was taken back to the Anna Timar. Several pages were missing. What remained were mathematical calculations and, on the last page, a few lines in broken, emotional Spanish. The crew couldn't read it. They were Italian. But they knew they had stumbled onto something personal and horrifying. The Fausto had returned for the third and final time, but this time it brought no survivors. Just a corpse, a notebook, and a void of answers. When the Anna Timar docked, the notebook was handed to authorities and eventually made its way back to La Palma. Through handwriting analysis and confirmation from family, it was revealed that the notebook had belonged to Julio, the mechanic and last-minute passenger who had begged for help that fateful night. His wife recognized the handwriting immediately. It was the same notebook he used for work, daily calculations, mechanical logs, and personal notes. But the notebook had been tampered with. 28 pages were missing, torn from the center. Why? What had been written there? And who removed them? No one could say. What remained at the front were some mundane figures, but the final page was far from ordinary. It was a goodbye letter, a farewell scribbled in a hand that was weak, fragmented, and riddled with emotion. In the note, Julio gave instructions to his wife about managing his finances, his life insurance policy, his bank accounts, and he ended with a line that pierced through the confusion like a dagger. "Never tell our child what happened to me. God has already written my destiny. I love you." Those were his final words. No explanation of what went wrong. No clue about the fate of the other 3 men. No mention of why the Fausto had disappeared twice. Just silence. A man who clearly knew death was near, who took the time to plan his estate and say goodbye, but who chose not to speak a single word about the horrors that had unfolded aboard the ship. Why? Was he protecting someone? Was he afraid of what might happen if the truth came out? Or were the answers hidden in the pages that had been ripped away? To this day, we don't know. No one knows what happened to Raymond, Alberto, or Miguel. No remains were ever found. No wreckage, no clothing, no life jackets. They were simply gone. And Julio, the man whose desperation had started this strange chain of events, was the only one left behind. His body found in the belly of the boat, holding a radio, as if he had been trying to reach someone until his very last breath. Some speculate that those 28 pages contained the truth. Others believe they were removed by someone trying to cover up what had happened. Perhaps a confession, perhaps something darker. But we'll never know, because the sea kept its secrets, and the only man who might have shared them decided to go to his grave with his lips sealed. For more than 50 years, the story of the Fausto has lingered in the maritime world like a question that refuses to be answered. And no matter how many times investigators, theorists, or curious minds return to its timeline, the case remains just as unsolvable as the day the boat sank. What happened on that vessel between July and October of 1968? Why did 4 experienced men drift far off course, refuse rescue and disappear again, only to be found with one of them dead, the others missing, and a cryptic notebook as the only clue? With official explanations offering little clarity, speculation has filled the void. Some believe it was a panic-induced tragedy, that after drifting off course, the men began to fear for their lives, lost trust in each other, and made a series of poor, irrational decisions. Others suspect something more sinister, that criminal activity may have been involved, perhaps smuggling or a botched deal that the crew was unwilling or unable to report. that might explain their refusal to be rescued, their silence with the Dukalsha's captain, and the torn pages from the notebook. Another popular theory is that something happened during the first disappearance, something that altered the crew forever. Some suggest a mental breakdown, possibly collective paranoia after being lost at sea with little food or water, and that this psychological pressure led to chaos and eventual death. There are even more fantastical theories, that the Fausto encountered a submarine or secret vessel, especially given the Cold War tensions at the time, and was involved in an international incident or accidental collision that no government wanted to acknowledge. Some tie the story to the Cuban Missile Crisis, suggesting the boat was intercepted or intimidated into silence by military forces, explaining the missing pages and the crew's refusal to talk. But even the most grounded explanations still struggle to answer the emotional core of the case. Why did Julio, a father desperate to return home to his sick child, accept help only to turn it down? Why did the three sailors, seasoned and reliable, act so strangely and then vanish without a trace? And why did Julio, who had time to write final words to his wife, omit every detail about what led to his death? The sea has never told, and maybe it never will. In the end, what we have is a case that's less about what happened and more about what was never said. It's about silence, on the boat, in the notebook, and in the official records. It's about how, sometimes, even when we recover the vessel, find the body, and trace the timeline, we still don't get the truth. The Fausto didn't just get lost at sea. It pulled us into the fog with it. And it left behind a final chilling message, not in words, but in everything that was left unsaid. In the decades since the Fausto was last seen, drifting across the Atlantic with a single lifeless passenger and a ripped notebook, the story has passed from government reports to barroom legends, from newspaper archives to online forums, evolving from a maritime tragedy into something far stranger, a ghost story written in salt water and silence. But what sets this story apart from myths is that every piece of it is real. The boat existed. The crew existed. The rescues happened. The death was confirmed, and still, despite it all, there is no official explanation. No timeline that fits. No confession to close the book. The Fausto's story challenges us not just as investigators or storytellers, but as people. It makes us ask what we believe about coincidence, about silence, about how much truth we're ever really owed. It's the story of a boat that should have taken 7 hours to return, but took a lifetime to explain, and still came up empty. It's about Julio, a father who rushed to save his daughter and became the only man found dead aboard a boat that had no reason to disappear once, let alone 3 times. It's about 3 sailors whose fates remain unknown. Men who may have died in fear, in conflict, or in some deeper mystery we've never truly grasped. And it's about the way the sea keeps secrets, even when it spits out the evidence. But most of all, the Fausto is a mirror. It reflects our fear of the unknown, our instinct to fill silence with stories, our need to believe that everything has a reason, even when it doesn't. For 50 years, people have tried to solve the mystery of the Fausto. They've drawn maps, tracked currents, built timelines, argued in comment sections and wrote letters to editors. But in the end, we're left with fragments, a broken course, a found corpse, a missing truth. And maybe that's what makes it unforgettable. Because in an age where we expect every mystery to be unraveled, every story to be solved, and every ending to be clean, the Fausto reminds us that some endings are fog. Some stories don't close. They echo. And as long as there are people asking, what happened? The Fausto will keep sailing, quietly, endlessly, across the ocean of our imagination. Thank you for watching. If this story stirred something in you, Share it. Keep the conversation alive, because maybe the only way to honor the dead is to never stop asking why they were lost.